We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Carol Baldwin. Carol is the founder of Flownetic MTB Skills, and she is a PMBIA Level 3 certified mountain bike skills instructor. She's also a Singletracks contributor and product tester. Thanks for joining me, Carol.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So today we're going to be talking about mountain biking with flat pedals, and I'm curious, have you always mountain biked with flat pedals?
So I actually started on clipless, like I think most people did for back in the day when I was first getting started with mountain biking.
Mm-hmm.
It was always an interesting thing to me because it just seemed like it kind of elevated the learning curve for people getting new to this whole off-road riding, having
Mm-hmm.
to suddenly have their feet attached to this contraption, this two-wheeled contraption. They don't know how to get up and over obstacles. But yeah, I think probably for the first, 5 or 6 years of my mountain bike experience, I was riding clipped in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is scary when you think about it, and especially when you first started. I remember being terrified and like, how does this work? Like, I'm going to fall over, or like, what if I need to get off the bike quickly and I'm clipped in? Yeah.
Yeah, I probably did like a handful of rides using the cheap plastic pedals that come with the bike and hiking shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember my very first set of clipless shoes. I went and did a group ride with a friend, and he invited me, and he was all enthusiastic. And so I bought the shoes, I bought the pedals. I was so stoked, and I literally set the bike up in my apartment. I was leaning on the bar, and I practiced clipping and unclipping like 50 times.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I've got this. I get to the group ride, hop on my bike, roll on across the parking lot being like, oh yeah, look at me, I'm so cool. I go to wave to the gang and be like, hey y'all. And I couldn't unclip. In front of this group of people I had never met, I couldn't unclip, and I just flopped over straight, like on my side, straight to the asphalt. And I just laid there like, okay.
Oh my gosh. But you stuck with it. I mean, it sounds like you rode clipless for many years. And now how long has it been since you switched back to flats?
I had to dig through photos to figure out exactly when, but in about 2018 is when I started finding, I made the switch to flat pedals in 2018, and I was progressing my riding. I was riding more technical terrain, and I found myself kind of hitting this plateau where I was more afraid of failing and just like being unable to unclip and step off because I was clipped in. So I was just hesitating, and I felt like it was holding back my riding.
Mm-hmm. So
that was kind of like the first part of that's kind of the first thing that drew me to thinking maybe I should learn how to ride flat pedals.
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody is always like so excited to learn bunny hops. Like bunny hops are another big thing that I just kind of used that as that was kind of like the carrot on the stick that was just like, okay, if I can work on my flat pedal riding, and use that to improve my technique so I can have a good, proper bunny hop technique.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of these were the kind of the things that were kind of drawing me over. It's like, it's easy enough to do it in clips because you're physically attached to the pedal, but how do I do it if I'm not fastened to it,
Right. That is a great question. And that's what, for me, so I'm similar to you. Started out not with clipless, but pretty quickly went to clipless pedals. And I've ridden my mountain bike with clipless pedals probably for 20, 25 years, something like that.
Oh, wow.
And just recently, finally decided to try flat pedals. And for me, it was difficult. If you're riding flat pedals now, you've never tried clipless, you're probably thinking wow, clipless is tough. It's hard going the other direction as well, I found. And I was really hesitant because of what you're saying too. I was like, geez, I don't think I can bunny hop without clipless pedals. And, I was afraid of a lot of things. Did you find it difficult to switch back from clipless to flat pedals?
It was definitely a struggle at first. I think the interesting thing is I was looking back on it now. I think what has really been highlighted to me is going from clipless to flats was an excellent transition because it helped me strengthen a lot of skills that a lot of the underlying skills like that are at the foundation, like the more foundational skills of mountain biking.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is really this idea of pressure control. And at the risk of getting a little bit nerdy with this, so pressure control is this idea of getting heavy and light on the bike.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason I struggled so much at first is when you're clipped in and your foot is like fastened to the pedal,
Mm-hmm.
you don't really have to think about whether or not your feet are heavy. You don't have to think about heavy and light feet as much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because no matter what you do, your foot is there. But I found that the more I rode, the more I started riding flat pedals when I made the transition. Like
Mm-hmm.
at first, my feet were literally flying all over the place.
Yes.
It was a little sketchy. It was a little dicey, but I stuck with it. But the more I rode, the more I found myself, the more fluid things got.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know if you know this, but your ankles, that's a joint. It's supposed to move.
Yes.
And it can move up and down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your pedals are on the spindle and they move and dance with it. So I think the biggest struggle was just realizing that that's another joint that can move, that can
Mm-hmm.
swim and dance with the bike, especially going up and over terrain. And as you get heavy and or light, you weight and unweight the bike.
Mm-hmm.
That was the struggle. And it was actually pretty eye-opening because once I started figuring that out, it kind of let my whole body loosen up because I wasn't so focused on just staying so rigid to try to plant myself on the pedals.
Mm-hmm.
I could kind of rise with the ebbs and flows a little bit better.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say something similar to what you were saying initially about like when you ride with flat pedals, like you have to get more foundational with your skills and like you can't rely on the pedal to do as much of the work for you. And like I think there's definitely satisfaction with riding properly and like having proper technique. But at the same time, like do you think you're faster or slower with one of them? Like I think you're definitely right. Like there's more satisfaction in like riding flat pedals and like doing it properly, but like, and you're definitely cheating when you're on clipless, but like, does that matter?
I don't think it matters. It's a very funny subject. And like, I've asked different people, like their opinions on like flats versus clips. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I tried asking my husband, like, hey, he's been a clips rider. He's been clipless from the day he started. And
Mm-hmm.
he's like almost a rabid clipped in fan and like won't entertain the opposite.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
that was me for decades. So yes.
I think whether you're faster or slower because of your pedals, whether it's riding flats or clipless, that's not going to be the magic pill that makes you a faster or better rider. I think
Mm-hmm.
both of them definitely have their pros and cons, and personal preference and comfort level is a big part of that. Like,
Right.
you see a lot of people who are excellent riders on both flavors, and that's not necessarily what's holding them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they're not having a good time with a section or whatever.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned there are pros and cons to each one. So let's talk about that. Like, what are some of the pros? What are the advantages of flat pedal riding? One of them that you mentioned early on was like it's easier to bail when you're not clipped in. That's kind of the main draw, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting. I think like again. So thinking back to like when I started riding, it was almost looked down upon to ride flat pedals because it was such a beginner thing. So everybody wanted to transition quickly into clipless
Mm-hmm.
because that's what all the cool kids ride. That means you've got your act together, right?
Right.
But being able to step off of your bike easily is great. It's a great confidence builder, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem I was having with riding more technical terrain. I didn't feel like I could get myself safe if I was in a bad situation.
Right.
So by switching to riding flats, if things are getting a little too bumpy and I'm like, oh no, I got to bail.
Mm-hmm.
It's less of a muscle memory to like less
Right.
muscle memory required to like really step off and stuff.
Yeah.
That's, I think for confidence building and for people who are starting with mountain biking, it's a really great tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's not something that should necessarily be, I don't know, frowned upon maybe, or it's not something that should be disregarded by more advanced riders. Like just because you can get off your pedals more easily. what I like about flat pedals is that there is flexibility.
Yeah, in terms of like your foot position,
Yep.
right? That's one of the things that I'm really appreciating about it is, yeah, you can, I mean, obviously with clipless pedals, there's a thing called float where you can kind of like twist your foot from side to side. But as far as like front and back on the pedals, like with clipless, you're locked into that. But on flats, you can kind of move it around during the ride, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so part of the challenge with flat pedals is that you're the one generating the grip, right? So, you're weighting and unweighting yourself, and it's up to you to kind of, work with that dance and flow of your feet on those pedals to stay glued on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes you get bumped a bit and you land in a weird position, and that's definitely that's definitely seen as a downside to flats. So if you get your feet bumped out of position, it's awkward.
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the world. You can, if you ride out the section, you can pretty easily get yourself back into place.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I do like about it is if I want to ride in a more stable position, I can position my feet for that, right?
Right.
I can, kind of cheat the pedal a little bit more under the arch of the foot.
Mm-hmm.
It supports my foot overall. It's just a much more comfortable fit for my foot on the pedal. It supports my foot a lot better, right?
Right. On a clipless pedal, you generally have like a smaller platform. So all your weight is concentrated on like a smaller area of the pedal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, with a flat pedal, so with clipless pedals, you have to commit to the one position. That's your do or die.
Mm-hmm.
You go for power or you go for stability. You can't get best of both worlds.
Right.
With flat pedals, if I want to put down power, I'll sometimes wiggle my feet back a little bit and I'll get the ball of my foot right on that spindle so I can put down the power if I'm climbing or if I'm sprinting.
Yep.
And if I get into like a chunky situation with like a chunky rock garden or something where I want a little bit more stability, I'll just cheat my feet forward a little bit, put the ball of the foot right in front of that spindle. It'll cradle the arch a little bit better. That's going to make me feel like I'm standing on a much more solid platform. And that's going to let me, it just like lets you engage your legs a little bit better to build a stronger foundation underneath you. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. For sure. That's something that I guess I didn't really anticipate, moving to flat pedals and then going back. It's weird because obviously like on my gravel bike, I'm still riding with clips and all of a sudden it feels weird. It's like, my feet feel like, it's not like to the level of having like joint pain, but it also like, I'm more conscious of like, man, my feet are really locked in here. In terms of like, the motion that I'm doing and like, yeah, there's not a lot of room to maneuver, to keep your knees happy during the ride.
I'm not going to claim that I know all of the physiological side of what goes into a pedal stroke, but I like the flexibility of moving my feet around because it lets me engage different parts of my leg. So
yeah,
like you, it's like I used to have clips on my gravel bike, but it just started feeling a little bit weird and it was always just working the same muscles, right? So I actually just finally put flat pedals on my gravel bike.
Oh, wow.
Mostly, I'm not riding like, I'm not racing. I'm not trying to go fast. I'm just trying to have a good time. So I feel like I can achieve a lot of the same things. Like I don't really need my feet to be locked in there. And it gives me some flexibility for adjusting my foot position and engaging different muscles as I'm pedaling.
Yeah. I want to talk later about like which types of rides maybe flat pedals makes sense for, but yeah, it's cool that you're able to use them even for gravel riding, which probably not a lot of people do. One of the things too that I like about flat pedals is it's easier to like find the pedal from a stop, like if you're stopped on the trail and you want to like get back on the bike and start riding, like your foot it's easy to find it. I know for me, a lot of times, I might not be able to clip in like one side and, you're like going through something really technical and you're like, I can't get clipped in. But yeah, so it is definitely easier with flat pedals.
I will tell you that I will say that I don't miss those extra 3 to 5 seconds of that wiggle that you have to do with your ankle when you're trying to clip in and it doesn't quite want to bite and you're like sitting there balancing awkwardly on your bike.
Yeah.
It's like, why won't it go? Why won't it clip in? And then it finally does.
Yeah.
I don't miss that.
Right. It's always hard too when like somebody's behind you and you feel bad because you're trying to like slowly like get clipped in and you don't want to slow them down and you're just like, why can't I find it? So yeah, that is nice. Are there any other advantages, would you say, to flat pedals before we start talking disadvantages?
I mean, when it comes down to footwear, I have found that I prefer the flat pedal shoes. I just think they're more comfortable on and off the bike. Style wise, at least in general, they tend to be a little bit more casual, and you don't have the tap shoe effect.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily lend itself to better or worse. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to a better or worse riding experience. But you know, to some people, these things they matter.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, and I think you're right too. Whether we like to admit it or not, it is cooler to ride with flat pedals. Like the shoe, like you said, the shoes are better. Yeah, and we've just looking through the Singletracks archives. We've written about this a lot. Like people who have, like us, who have started with clipless pedals and then they go to flats, and we're all excited and we want to talk about like why we made the transition. But yeah, for a lot of people, it is like you've been riding a long time and you have a lot of these skills already. But yeah, it's just time for something different for a lot of us, I think. And so yeah, and flat pedals, they're just seems a little cooler. You
kind of touched on something there. Like, I think if you've been a long time clipless rider, there's nothing wrong with riding what you prefer. But if you're looking for a new challenge, if you're looking for a new challenge and trying to step up your skills and find a new way to experience a trail, give flats a try. It's going to give you something new to think about, because I think a big part of it is, like I said before, like a lot of people genuinely don't seem to know that their ankles have flexibility and mobility. Like ankles can move to help you get into that flow. It's like, I think having people be like looser and more relaxed on the bike in general is great, but that looseness and more relaxed nature almost stops at the knee. And so when folks start riding flat pedals, and if they're having trouble and getting popped off, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're just being too rigid.
Yeah.
So it's a new way to find some flow, and it's, flat pedal skills translate very well into riding clipped in. Like, if you think about how much movement you put into your ankles, like while you're weighting and unweighting, like if you're getting heavy on the bike, you drop your heels. If you're getting light, you raise your heels and point your toes down. That's going to help you a lot while riding clipped in. You're not going to have to think about that foot popping off the pedal necessarily, but it is something that is going to help you move overall.
Yeah. It'll make you a smoother rider and be able to flow a little bit better. Yeah. I definitely have experienced that. So in terms of disadvantages, I mean, you mentioned like it's easier to get bumped off the pedals when you're riding technical stuff. And then I would add to that, like it's harder for me, it was a lot harder to jump and do things like bunny hops where, if you're on clipless pedals, like you just literally jump and the bike comes up with you because you're attached to it. But yeah, it is still possible though to bunny hop with flat pedals, right? It just takes a little more effort.
I think, and I don't think it's necessarily that it takes more effort. This just kind of comes back to unlocking that mobility and letting those ankles flex and dance, right? As far as it being harder to bunny hop, I think it comes down to when you're riding clipped in, you're more or less taking for granted that foot to pedal attachment.
Right.
You're not having to think about it, right? And that by not having to think about it, you're not really thinking about letting those ankles move as much. When you're riding on flat pedals, you have to let your feet swim. You have to let those heels dip and rise with the ebb and flow of the trail. Otherwise, that's where that separation comes from. If your ankle is rigid and the bike rises or dips below you, that's where you stand a chance of the pedal falling out from under you, or you rising and leaving the pedal.
Right.
So flat pedals have those pins that dig into your rubber shoes, and you have to let your foot, stay stuck to that. And to do that, that's where that ankle motion comes through, right?
I see. Yeah.
So for bunny hopping or getting off the ground with flat pedals, a lot of what we talk about is, you know, pressure through our feet and just like counter pressure, like between our hands and like wedging ourselves between like our hands and our feet, or just anything that enables us to apply weight and pressure into our pedals to help bring those pedals with us.
Right.
The difference between a clipless rider who doesn't have to think about their feet staying on the pedals is if they move the legs, the bike will follow.
Right.
Flat pedal rider needs to make sure those feet are staying flat on the pedal and they're applying the pressure to bring it with. So I don't, you know, I guess you could say it's harder to bunny hop on flat pedals because there's just an extra element to think about.
Right.
But once you spend the time developing that skill and that technique, it becomes second nature. You don't really have to think about it as much because your feet will move with the pedals on the trail more readily.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a good point that it's not necessarily more difficult. It's just maybe for me, it's just not natural. Like it's not an intuitive thing where, you know, obviously like if you're wearing shoes and you jump, like the shoes are going to go with you because they're attached to your foot.
Exactly.
Versus if you're like standing on a flip flop or I don't know, a skateboard. I have no idea how people like do ollies on a skateboard. Like,
yeah,
it's got to be a really hard thing, but it's similar. I mean, it can be done. And once you learn how to do it, like it becomes second nature, but it's not necessarily like intuitive at first.
Yeah. And I think the ollie on a skateboard is kind of an excellent example. And that's a rigid, like skateboards don't have any suspension. So there's no give, there's no bounce.
Yeah.
But you're getting heavy, you're loading into the board, and then you're getting light. There is a little bit of a flick in the back, but you're letting that skateboard come with you, and it's following your feet, and you're using your feet to guide it. You're never fully attached, but you're guiding it, and it's following your energy, and then coming down with you. Yeah,
it's like magic. I mean, you're describing it, and I've seen people do it, but it's like, wow, like that's pretty cool that works.
It's magic voodoo witchcraft, I'm telling you. I like to think of it as so there's this idea of pressure control, right? You get heavy, you get light on the bike. One thing that happens when you get light on the bike is if you're putting all of your weight into the bike and bouncing, it wants to follow you. So you need to be able to absorb it into you.
Okay.
And this is going to be much more critical when you're riding in flat pedals, because if you bounce into the bike, try to absorb it, but don't accept it, that's where the bike pushes you up as the suspension rebounds. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with having to be more fluid, learning to be more fluid, because if you take away having to worry about your feet coming off the pedals, then it doesn't really matter how you bounce around on the bike. You may not necessarily have to be as precise with that pressure control and making sure it stays with you, because you're going to stay attached no matter what. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you've said it a few times, pressure control. And I take that to mean, and what I've experienced is that, yeah, you do need to like put more pressure on the pedals to like keep that connection with the flat pedal, whether you're jumping or you're just, you know, on a really technical, like bumpy section. And to me, like, I mean, does that take more effort, like more muscle, more like strength to do that? Like, are you going to get more tired riding flat pedals versus clipless, do you think?
That's a really good question. I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people talk about like efficiency of clipless pedals. And, you know, obviously like if you're a cross country rider or certainly like a road bike rider, you're going to be on clipless pedals. And they say it's more efficient, I guess, because part of it is like pedal stroke. You're kind of able to like lift the pedal as you move through the stroke. But also, yeah, I'm just finding that putting that pressure down to like keep that foot pedal connection, that also just, it uses different muscles, at least maybe it's not less efficient, but it is a different set of muscles, I think.
You know, there's a good chance that it's making you aware of muscles you didn't know that had to work.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking, you know, I'm thinking back to my first night ride I ever did.
Mm-hmm.
And we were riding at Blankets Creek. I was going down something chunky and loose that I've done a million times,
Mm-hmm.
but I was riding it in the dark with a very sad little spotlight in front of me. And I just remember all of a sudden I was aware of all of these micro movements and all these little muscle twitches that were like working in my legs and my hips and my core, everything that I was feeling to help me stay balanced in this uneven terrain because I didn't have all the information.
Yeah.
So switching from clips to flats, I think is going to be an interesting experience for folks it's going to be an interesting experience for folks to start experiencing or get a feel for different leg muscles that want to be invited to the party.
Right.
I can't really speak to whether it's more efficient.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate because a lot of people will say like a proper pedal stroke shouldn't involve any like pulling up, right? Like, I just remember this debate from many years ago, and maybe it's been settled since then. But there's two schools of thought. Like some people say like, when you're pedaling, it's just all downward pressure, right? And like when you're on the backside of the stroke, like basically you're not putting any pressure on the pedal. Whereas other people say, well, no, on the backside, you can actually be lifting with that foot, which you obviously can't do as well with flats. What I find myself doing on flats is rather than lifting on the backside of the stroke, I'm kind of like pulling backward, if that makes sense. Like you're dug into the pins enough that you can kind of pull backwards for a few degrees of that. I mean, obviously when you're like at the top of the stroke, like that's not going to help you, but basically getting from like 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, you can pull a little backwards, but you can't necessarily pull up.
You covered everything. I think the biggest misconception with flat pedals is that there is no pedaling efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
There's been enough of a sample size as far as like research done into the efficiency of flats versus clips. I think they've maybe tried it with a couple people like, hey, let's give this pro rider who is 100% clip rider and put them on a stationary bike and measure their output on both types of pedals. But if they're not efficient, if they're not fully proficient at riding flat pedals, like, are they going to have accurate data?
Right. Let's
talk to like somebody who spends thousands of hours a year on a bike on flat pedals and see what how much power they can put out on flats versus a clipless pedal kind of thing.
Right. For me, especially just in the first, the first few weeks, for sure, I was not very efficient, but over time you do develop that. And I think at this point, nearly as efficient on flat pedals, but I still feel like it's a little less than clipless.
I think you can find ways to build efficiency. You do lose that mechanical advantage of being physically attached. So if you are one of those people that likes to pull up on the backside of the pedal stroke, then you are going to lose that. You can overcome it by pointing your toes down and putting a little bit of backwards pressure and kind of dragging it up, similar to the kind of pressure that you would use to to do like a rear wheel lift, for example. And that's going to help bring it up and around. It's going to engage different muscles. I think if you're getting somebody who's going from clipless to flats, they might just notice it. I think that the thing they're going to notice is just like the difference in the muscles that are being worked. Or how much they're being worked. But that being said, I would say that most people, when they're pedaling, unless they're pro level racers, I think a lot of people are probably a little bit more of the mash, mash, mash. Like they mash more on the front end without worrying so much on the back end.
Yeah.
There are ways to kind of smooth out your pedal strokes, whether you're flats or clipped in.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like the bunny hop thing. I mean, where if you're clipped in, you're kind of automatically going to do a better job pedaling in circles rather than squares, as people like to say. But
that's a good way to put it.
But that's not to say that you can't do it. It's just not as intuitive with flat pedals as it is kind of for clipless. One of the other things that like really kept me away from flats for a long time, and again, this is one of those things where I saw other people going from clipless to flats, and I was always like, oh man, yeah, maybe one day I'll do that. And I said that to myself for years until finally doing it late last year. But I was always afraid of just like shredding my shins on the pins on a flat pedal. And I know for a lot of people, that's like a pretty common injury, right?
It definitely is. I jokingly call it a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very big downside to flat pedals. If you get it wrong, it can go very wrong very, very fast. That being said, I started riding flat pedals in 2018 and I was doing pretty darn good until last year. Until last year when I had an incident where I was riding my gravel bike with flat pedals and I was just goofing around and I hopped off a curb and my foot and my pedal separated. Ooh. And did not find each other on the landing. So, these things, they happen.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end,
what will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Yeah. Well, getting a pedal to your shin, I mean, it doesn't feel good no matter what it is. I guess just the difference is there's going to be blood probably if it's a flat pedal versus a clipless one.
Yeah. I mean, either way, it's a hunk of metal spanking you in the shin, and that's not comfortable for anyone. Right. I usually tell folks if you're wanting to try flat pedals and if you're scared of shin injuries, get some soccer shin guards. Just go to a sporting goods store, get some like $30 shin guards, just something to kind of take the edge off, and that's going to take some of that fear away, and that's going to open you up to wanting to try a little bit more. I think a fear of injury and a fear of injury in something as gnarly as getting all these sharp and pointy pins, getting that cheese grater action going on your shin is a big deterrent for people. But I think with some proper padding, it's a good way to build some confidence. Yeah. And I know well-seasoned flat pedal riders who they wear shin guards full time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I did when I was starting out. I have some Shadow Conspiracy shin guards that I use them off and on for mountain biking. I don't usually need knee pads, but I definitely bang my shins on all kinds of stuff. And so, I wore the shin guards for the first few rides, but you know what happened? I ended up shredding my calves from the pedals. Somehow I got the backside too. So beware.
Oh, it can be a dangerous endeavor. It can be a threat to your shins and your calves. But I think mountain biking is a dangerous sport. You can't really expect it all to be unicorns and rainbows and be perfectly safe. Like there's risk in everything we do on the trail. I think flat pedals are a worthwhile experiment for most people. And if you want to try it and wear shin guards, then so be it. Just give it a shot. I had my first real, shin scraping incident last year, which was, I'll spare you the details, but it was pretty gnarly. And I rode with a shin guard for a few months after that, just to protect the wound. But it didn't really deter me from continuing to ride flat pedals.
Yeah. Yep. Same.
I personally find that, it's not that flats are better or worse. I just find that I just enjoy my time on a bike, knowing that I can step off it. And I think just getting over the psychological impact of shredding my shin, it took me a minute to kind of get past that. Yeah. So I wore, after that incident, I wore the shin guard for a while, and I was kind of like a little hesitant, little second guessing going on. But once I kind of let myself get back into the flow of things, it's not as terrifying. It's terrifying, but it's not, I don't feel like it's going to happen every ride kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of jumped to my last question, but let's go ahead and address it. I mean, like you said, riding with flat pedals, it is a little bit more fun. Like it seems a little less serious. It's more casual. Like for me, it's all about like just being able to jump on a bike and ride anytime and not be like, oh, I got to get my special shoes. And, for it to feel like it's like a big thing, it's just flat pedals, it's just more fun.
I like that idea that it's, you don't have to go for the special footwear. You don't even have to go for a proper mountain bike shoe.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps it a little bit more casual and a little bit more relaxed. But, that being said, like either way, riding a bike is fun.
That's true.
Whether you're clipped in and, whether you're a clipped in hammerhead trying to go for the KOM, or you're just there to tootle around in the woods and go find random stuff and just take in the beauty of nature. As long as you're on two wheels, I'm not gonna give you too hard of a time.
Right.
On what your footwear and pedal choice is.
Right. This does, a lot of times it does devolve into a debate about which one is better. And yeah, there is no better, right? Like you said, they're both fine choices, and everybody is, free to make their own choice and enjoy what they enjoy. So
yeah,
let's talk a little bit more about the pedals and equipment. So one of the things that I had been hearing for a long time from a lot of people is that bigger and wider platforms are better for flat pedals. And to a degree, obviously, like we're not going to be riding around with like dinner plates on our cranks. So why do people say that? Like what is the advantage of like a bigger or wider platform on a flat pedal?
So I think the advantages of a bigger and wider platform is like the main advantage is just more surface area, more space for pins.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that it has to be proportional to your foot. If I'm a women's 8.5, which is about a men's 7.5. There's kind of a sweet spot for a pedal size for me to ride.
Okay.
Like I don't want to be riding something that's the exact size of my shoe, but I also don't want to ride something that's like the size of a matchbox. I like to use the analogy when I'm working with folks who are transitioning from clipless to flat pedals. One of the examples I like to use is, talking about like what, you're walking on your tippy toes, like you balance on your feet. If you're on the balls of your feet, that's a much smaller surface area, and it's going to engage a whole lot more of your leg, and it's going to make it harder to be stable because that's just engaging so many muscles.
Right.
And if you have a very small pedal platform, like if let's just say the surface of your pedal is like the size of a credit card, which is probably what most clipless pedals are. Like if that is your balance point,
yeah,
a lot more of your leg is going to end up engaging and having to work to keep you stable. So when it comes to pedal sizes in relation to your foot, it's like if you have a big foot and you're standing on a pedal that's too small, you have less area to distribute the weight.
Right.
And you have less area to place your foot well and have it be supported in such a way that you can feel stable. So think about like walking around on your tippy toes. You're making your surface, like your contact point with the ground, much smaller, as opposed to when you're walking completely flat-footed. So
right, yeah, that makes sense.
If you're on like too small of a pedal platform, you don't really have a lot of flexibility for what part of your foot you're going to be standing on, and you don't have much of a say in how you're going to find that balance point, whether, without getting too specific, like if you're having the ball of your foot on the spindle or in front of it, or how you want to place that. Foot placement, foot positioning on the pedal really matters when it comes to flat pedal.
Right.
When it comes to flat pedals.
Yeah.
So if you have too big of a pedal, like if your pedal is too long, like if it's, let's just say for argument's sake, it's almost the size of your foot, then there's only so many places you can actually place your foot on that pedal. I mean, yeah, you're going to have more surface area in contact with your foot, but it's going to get harder to actually find that sweet spot to achieve your goal, whether it be balance or stability.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times we don't realize too, I mean, you flex your feet as well. And so, yeah, you don't want your, like you said, complete coverage of the pedal, because then your foot is completely flat. You're not able to like flex your feet. And then also for me, what I've found is the larger pedals, like I was getting a lot more pedal strikes with a wider platform, especially when you're like cornering and like riding off camber stuff.
Oh yeah.
For me, there is a sweet spot, like bigger is better until a certain point. If you're feeling unstable, or maybe you're feeling like kind of hot spots in your feet, like that could mean that your pedal's too small. But then I think on the flip side, if like you're getting pedal strikes or you're not feeling like your foot can flex and be mobile enough, then maybe your platform's a little too big.
Yeah. And I think I like to give my feet room to move around, and kind of finding that Cinderella pedal that fits your feet just right.
Yeah.
I think most of them are kind of in the ballpark. There's a few exceptions that go extremely big in terms of like the actual platform size. And I'd say those are probably better suited to folks with bigger feet because they need, I like to think of how is this pedal supporting the arch of my foot? And the arch of my foot is really, I only really need that kind of 3-inch ish platform under the arch of my foot. If it's any bigger than that, it's going to be overkill. But somebody with like size 12 or, size 12 feet is going to want to get a little bit more than just like that. They're going to want to get something a little bit larger that matches the arch of their foot better.
Yeah. So yeah, what is your favorite flat pedal, or do you have a few?
So, well, my favorite one right now that I have on several of my bikes is my favorite pedal right now is the Raceface Atlas.
Okay.
So they just redid this one in the last year or two. And what I really like about it, I like the size of the platform and I like the shape of it. And I just like the pin distribution. I just think it works well for me and my foot size, if anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a thing that I guess people look at, like a spec that is talked about a lot, like the number of pins per side. Is there a right number, or is it about the configuration? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. There is such thing as too much of a good thing. Just like we talked about too much surface area with too big of a pedal. I think, if you have too many pins, it gets hard to place them strategically in such ways that they actually benefit the grip. And actually, it's hard to fit too many. The more pins you have on a pedal, I think it creates more of like what is it called? Like those nail beds, like the,
right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's you have so many that none of them are actually like putting a lot of pressure on. And
exactly.
Right. I found that pedals with too many pins are not as grippy. Like you would think more pins is more grip, but at some point more pins is actually going to give you less overall grip.
Exactly. And, this also comes down to the platform size and the pin count. So just as an example, I'm looking at my Raceface Atlases right now, and let's see, they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They've got 10 pins. And then I'm also looking, in my other hand, I'm looking at the Raceface Affect pedals that I reviewed for you guys a couple years ago. So these Raceface Affect pedals are actually the pedals. These are the ones that I had my incident on the gravel bike. So these, my point is the Raceface Affect pedals also have so both of these pedals from Raceface have 10 pins, and the shape of the pedals is actually pretty darn close. Like you could almost say that the Atlas and the Affects have I'm looking at the profile of them, they look very similar, but the Atlas are just a little bit not wider, they're a little bit longer. So okay. It kind of comes down to you have to have the right size and you have to have the right pin configuration to have a positive experience between your foot and your pedal.
Right.
Too many pins is too many cooks in the kitchen, and that's just going to make it harder for your foot and for the rubber to actually dig in and get a good grip.
Right. Yeah.
But too few pins, and you run the risk of not being able to generate enough traction between the two.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so one of the product tests that you did for us a while back too was comparing aluminum pedals to composites, and a lot of brands they offer both. Some of the brands even it's like the same design essentially. It's just different materials that they're using for the pedals. And when we say composite here, we're not talking about carbon fiber. For pedals, it's like a nylon material that they use. And so those pedals, they're usually like more colorful, or they look a little like chunkier. But what's your thought? Like aluminum pedals or composite? Do you have a preference, or like how do people decide like which one is a better choice for them?
When it comes to the choice between aluminum and composite, I think the main things are it'll come down to budget and aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the first consideration. If a lot of these brands have the aluminum and composite versions that, as you said, they're identical.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was that the performance was pretty darn, the actual pedal performance as far as like sticking to the pedal
Mm-hmm.
and rideability was pretty much identical. Like I didn't really feel like there was a big enough difference between the two
Mm-hmm.
to warrant spending an extra $100 to go aluminum.
Yeah.
But if you also want, if you also have to kind of look at it in terms of like rebuildability, serviceability, and like
Mm-hmm.
how durable are the pedals?
Yeah, because the composites, they're usually cheaper, and so that's not just about the platform. Like, because they're trying to hit a different price point, they're going to put the spindle and the bearings are not going to be the same quality
Exactly.
a lot of times as the aluminum one.
Exactly. And, my disclaimer there is I haven't quite gotten far enough with any one set of pedals to having to needing to service them or take them apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really speak to that. But, out of the product tests that I ran for you guys last year or the year before, out of the product tests that I did for you guys, my favorite pedals were the one-up composite and the one-up aluminum pedals. And those are an identical shape, size, platform. The biggest difference between the two was, I think it was the spindle and the bearing.
Okay.
And one thing that I found was, so performance-wise, they both behaved identically. And, I could have gone, as a consumer, I could have gone either way. But, being in the position that I was able to try both and
Mm-hmm.
really get a feel for both. And those were actually the main pedals that I ran on all of my bikes for a couple of years, until I found these race-based atlases and fell in love. But that's another story for another day. And, tragically, part of the reason why I don't still use the aluminum one-ups is my bike fell off the bike rack and they got destroyed.
Oh, no.
So that was an interesting, like I've never seen a pedal bent in that way. It was quite fascinating. But,
Yeah.
durability wise and performance wise, aluminum pedals, it's usually an anodized aluminum. So as soon as they scratch, they expose the aluminum and they kind of lose the color after a while.
Mm-hmm.
If that bothers you, consider a composite pedal. A composite pedal, I have heard that they can be a little bit more brittle and they can break more easily than an aluminum pedal, but I haven't experienced that with rock strikes or anything. Maybe I just got lucky.
Or you're not riding in like 0-degree temperatures, like
that too. Oh, that's actually a good point. Temperature, considering temperature in your environment, like it rarely gets below freezing around these parts. So I haven't really subjected any of my bikes to that kind of weather, but that's definitely something to consider.
The composites too, I was surprised to find that most of them are going to be lighter weight than the aluminum ones, which again is like, for bike stuff, that's weird for like the cheaper thing to actually weigh less than the more expensive thing. But, and that's not to say that like it's always going to be that way, but for a lot of like comparable pedals, it seems the composites are going to be slightly lighter than the aluminum versions.
Yeah, I think, I'd kind of forgotten about that part. When it comes down to it, like if you're really chasing a lighter weight build and you're really concerned about the weight of your pedals, then I guess go for the composite. It's not gonna detract from the performance of your pedal compared to an aluminum pedal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the real delineation between the two, I think, is going to be aesthetics, whether you like the more plasticky look or the more, that the aluminum, that slick aluminum, anodized aluminum look.
Yeah. Yeah. They're more streamlined and thinner a lot of times too.
Yes.
Doesn't look as chunky. Yeah.
Exactly. I think aesthetics are going to be kind of my number one consideration. If budget is no issue, then aesthetics is the question. pedal performance wise, I feel like they're about on par with each other. Assuming that, and I'm saying that assuming it's an identical, like a carbon copy,
Right.
they're like copy paste the design and layout. If you're concerned about the bearing and the serviceability, and rebuildability of the pedal, then chances are the aluminum ones are likely to have higher end parts. But I think there have to be I'm sure there are some composite pedals out there built with serviceability in mind.
For sure. Yep. So let's talk about shoes. What do you look for in a shoe that's good for flat pedal riding?
So the main thing I look for in a shoe for flat pedal riding is, wow, it's like I just like, I'm wearing a pair of them and I'm like blanking on what I want out of them.
I mean, they got to look cool. That's number one, right?
They have to look cool. They have to be comfortable. They have to be functional. So I like a flat pedal shoe that's made with good rubber. And I like for them to have a bit of a stiffer sole.
Yes.
Which is actually a bit of a harder thing to find.
For sure. Yeah.
But, like we said earlier, it's like there's a little bit more of a coolness factor to the footwear that when it comes to riding flat pedals, because the shoe's going to be a little bit more casual.
Yeah. I mean, something like looking at flat pedals and the footwear that people choose to use with them, you might think like, oh, you could use like a skateboarding shoe or even like a running shoe. But yeah, in my experience, those are not stiff enough. And even some of the mountain bike shoes, like you're saying, they could stand to be a little bit stiffer. I mean, for me, yeah, I think the stiffer, the better, to a certain point, right? Like you don't want something like the cross country shoe that's going to have that like rigid, like carbon type of sole. You want something that's a little flexible, but also is gonna be firm too.
Yeah, I mean, it's as far as like an actual marketed mountain bike shoe. As far as like a marketed mountain bike shoe, yeah, a good. Really, what it comes down to in that world is good rubber. So having good sticky rubber, like the 510s have really good rubber, but for me personally, the ones that I've ridden, I have never found them to be stiff enough.
Yeah.
So like the 510, the Free Riders and the Free Rider Pros, I've ridden those two, and I just didn't find them to be stiff enough. The Free Rider Pros had some good stiffness to them, but the downside to them was the sole was so thin that I could actually feel the pins through the rubber. Like,
that's weird.
Yeah, it was a little bit weird. But, one thing I do see a lot is if you're wanting to start out and you want to get yourself a set of flat pedals and just try flat pedal riding, look into a pair of Vans, like Vans skateboard shoes.
Okay.
It's not going to be the best rubber. It's not, it's not going to be like, it's not going to be marketed as a mountain bike shoe necessarily. I can't really speak to the quality of the rubber, but it's a flat shoe. It's got a flat sole. And as long as it has a little bit of a texture, like a recessed texture to it, something that the pins can kind of slot into and start digging into. Like if you don't want to be riding, I don't think you want to ride a flat shoe that has like that the rubber is too smooth, because then it's just pins on rubber and they got to find a home.
Right.
If you look at, so like I'm wearing a pair of Ride Concepts Helion Elites right now, and they have this nice little honeycomb pattern underneath that has all these little ridges, all these little nooks and crannies. So as soon as I put my foot on the pedal, those pins kind of find a little slot and they kind of slot in and just kind of start digging in. And like over time, you can kind of see, you can kind of see where the pedal really digs into the shoe.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a good point. Like, I don't know, for me, so people love to talk about like sticky rubber and like how grippy it is on the pedal, that's 100%, that's true. And that's what you want. But that stickiness like doesn't translate off the bike for me anyway. Especially when, surfaces are a little bit wet or greasy. Like I find that I slip around a lot more off the bike on flat pedal shoes. And part of that is because, like you're saying, the tread on the shoe is not very deep. Like it's enough for the pins to kind of get in there, but not so much that it's going to like dig into the dirt if you're like really trying to hike a bike or something. Is that what you found?
Yeah, it's definitely, I have definitely had my moments where I regretted my footwear, especially on like steep hike a bike, like in loose and dusty or leafy sections. Like literally
leaves are the worst.
Literally carrying my bike up the mountain, and it's like for every step, it's like I slide back halfway. Right. So it's like it's flat shoes for hike a bike or wet conditions are not ideal.
No,
but there are some options out on the market these days that have a bit of a chunkier tread to them, and like a bit of the toe box, like the front of the toe box has a little bit more of they have like lugs on them to like really help with that hike a bike action. Yeah,
I've noticed that.
I know Ride Concepts has a pair that has that. Those are kind of my next in line shoes, and I'm trying to remember the model name.
Yeah, is it the Talic maybe that has that? Yeah, the Talic is the men's, and there's a women's version that has a different name.
Yeah,
it's got that the tread is on the toe actually.
Yep.
And the sides and the back.
Yep.
Basically everywhere except the bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a similar honeycomb pattern to it, and I'm comparing it to my Helions, and it's maybe a little bit deeper on the honeycomb pattern, but it's got these nice lugs on the toe box and on the heel that's going to hopefully make it a lot more pleasant to hike a bike.
Right.
The women's version is called the Flume.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense, because when I was first looking at those, I was looking at them from a clipless perspective, because they have a clipless version too, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. But yeah, now that I've slipped around on the trails enough on shoes that work great on the bike. I mean, they grip the pedals incredibly well. The ones I'm currently wearing are the North Wave. Oh, I forget, tail whips. Which, they're great on the bike, but as soon as you get into some leaves or like a wet rock or anything like that, you're going to be slipping around.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at those right now. Yeah, it's your choice of shoe should depend on what kind of riding you're doing and where you're going to be. If I'm at my local trails, then chances are a standard flat pedal shoe is going to be just fine. If I'm going to be hiking or getting into some sloppy elements, then that's where you kind of have to start looking for a shoe that fits, I guess, the environment. I know there are options out there, and I know that there's some rubber that's, I guess, more marketed towards wet and sloppy than others.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I mean, you mentioned that it depends on the ride. Are there any rides at this point for you that don't make sense for flat pedals, or do you ride everything with flat pedals?
These days, I find myself on flat pedals on my mountain and my gravel bikes, partially out of comfort and convenience. I like my flat pedal shoes. I like my flat pedals. And I would argue that I'm a little bit more of a casual rider to some degree. I'm not actively racing. I'm not chasing the KOMs or whatever. If I ever find my way back to a road bike, I would probably ride a proper, I would ride clipped in on a road bike because I'm looking for power and efficiency there. And I don't really want to have to think about my pedal, my foot placement on the pedals.
Yeah.
As a coach, I'm on and off my bike all the time during my coaching sessions. So I want the flexibility to hop on and hop off. I know it sounds silly, but I don't want to spend an extra 5 seconds clipping in before I try to demo something. And, I also kind of like to put my money where my mouth is. And if I'm telling somebody that's new to riding, hey, try out flat pedals, from an optic standpoint, it's going to look a lot better if I'm telling them to try flat pedals and, hey, it's going to help you improve your technique or work on these things and really get the technique down more, get better technique. If you try this with flat pedals and you don't have to rely on being clipped in to do it, it's going to look better for me to tell them to do that if I'm already riding flats.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
I think the only, if I were to ride road again, I would clip in. And I think if I were to get more serious into racing, I might consider riding clipped in. I think, I think the biggest thing with flats versus clips is I don't want people to think, I don't want anybody to think that there's a right or wrong.
Right.
It's at the end of the day, it's mountain biking. It's not life or death.
Right.
It's all about pros and cons.
Yeah.
So,
right. And for me, that's kind of where I've landed with that, is the pros and the cons. For me, that dictates like different types of rides where it makes sense. And, I fully went into this late last year, this kind of like flat pedal experiment, assuming that, I'd do it for a while, but then I would go back to clipless pedals. And fairly recently I've decided, well, no, I really don't need to go back to clipless for certain rides. I mean, for me, it's like rides that are, less than, let's say, 3 hours long. I'm fine with flats, but if I'm going to be riding all day, I think I would prefer clipless, just because it is, for me, it's more efficient. I pedal more efficiently with clipless. And then also the other weird thing that I've found is like technical climbing is still really difficult for me with flat pedals. I feel like I can climb a lot better on clipless pedals, which is weird. Like partially I think it's because of you're just like more committed when you're clipped in and you're like trying to get up and over something. Like, being able to bail is like a built-in excuse where I can just be like, I might not make it, I'm just going to jump off. Whereas if I'm clipped in, like I just got to go for it or else I'm going to fall.
yeah.
So yeah, if it's going to be technical, I think I'd probably prefer clipless.
I think there's a certain, you're right to a certain extent. It's like there is a sense of commitment. It's like a do or die.
Mm-hmm.
If you're clipped in, it's like, well, I got to do it or I'm going to flop over and it's going to be real inconvenient.
Yeah.
But, I wouldn't completely discredit flat pedals as being less efficient at climbing.
No.
Just to kind of go back to like the comfort level and what you're used to. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually I'm a really big fan of technical climbing and I ride in flats.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, at the end of the day, you're doing the same thing on both bikes. You're pedaling and moving up a hill.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to technique and skill.
Right.
And technique and skill is something that you can practice and develop.
Mm-hmm.
Strength and physical fitness is something you practice and develop.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really ever venture to say, I won't ever claim that one is better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
It comes down to how much effort you want to put into it and how much practice you want to put into it.
Right.
If you want to get better,
point.
if you want to get better at technical climbing with flat pedals, you need to practice climbing with flat pedals. You need to practice popping wheelies. You need to practice wheel lifts. You need to practice
Mm-hmm. shifting
your weight around and being able to rev up the engine right when you need it for those little surges of power.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's a little bit more, again, it comes down to kind of those mechanical advantages of like, you don't have to, like, you're physically attached to your pedals.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have to think about what your feet are doing and that they're going to go if you tell them to go, that just takes away a little bit of the brain power needed. And so you can, it's one less thing to think about. But I would say you can still get pretty darn good at technical climbing with flat pedals if you take the time to practice the skills that go into it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. It's my answer now is probably going to be different than it is in 3 months when I'm better at it. But yeah, with my current ability to climb technical on flat pedals, yeah, I'm definitely better at it with clipless. But yeah, just got to keep working at it.
Practice makes progression, as my coach friends like to say. You gotta invest the time in developing the skills to do the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, coming from, especially for somebody who is coming from a background of riding mostly clipped in
mm-hmm.
for the majority of your cycling life, that's what you're comfortable with. So getting into uncomfortable situations, that just takes one of those little factors out of it.
Right.
But now if you're getting into an uncomfortable situation, climbing something technical and awkward, and you're adding something that you're not as proficient at, which is riding flat pedals, not to discredit your flat pedal riding or your riding in general, but if you're adding that little extra element and you don't have all the kinks worked out, it just adds that extra little level of difficulty. But if you keep working at it, you'll find that you're just going to get right back to where you left off with riding clipped in.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big part of it for me. And I think what attracted me to it was that it is a new challenge. It's something to work on. I mean, do you think it goes both ways? Like if somebody has only ever ridden on flat pedals, is it worth giving clipless pedals a try?
I don't see why not.
Yeah. Why not?
It's part of mountain biking is trying new things.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't just keep riding the exact same trail over and over and over and expect to grow.
Right.
The benefits of riding clipped in are you don't have to think about staying on your pedals as much. I don't know. I'm honestly struggling to come up with a good way to phrase it without sounding like super like pro flat pedals. But it's like I think the benefits are, I think it's worth a try. If anybody's interested in trying clipless pedals, I think it's worth exploring. The riding might be a little bit different, but it might open up, I don't know, it's just a different perspective.
Right. Yeah, going both ways for sure.
Yeah, it's just a different perspective, and it might highlight, who knows? I'm not going to say I don't try to pressure people one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody tells me this is what they want to do, I will encourage them. I will encourage them to work on the skills necessary to enjoy whatever pedals they're riding.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, like you said, there's no right or wrong answer. If you want to ride flats or you want to ride clipless, do whatever it is that you enjoy, that's fun, that gets you where you want to go. And so, yeah, I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation and, talk about it again. Like it seems like this is a debate sometimes between people, but yeah, like you said, there's no right or wrong answer, and really appreciate your perspective on the topic.
Yeah. Happy to talk. Happy to chat pedals. It's a very near and dear subject to me. I love blowing people's minds when, they're starting out with mountain biking and we start getting them comfortable on flat pedals. And once you're comfortable on your feet, your feet being on the pedals, that is the foundation. That is how you build a strong foundation on the bike. So if you are comfortable on your feet and feel like you're secure, that's how you open yourself up to becoming a better rider. Because if you can trust that you're going to be attached to your bike, whether it's flats or clips, then you can start getting all sorts of rowdy with your, the rest of your body. And you can only, things only improve from there. So I like converting people to flat pedals. I will openly state that, but it's definitely, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but sure. I think it's an adventure. It's a path worth exploring, even if it's just for to learn a couple skills. Anything you do on flat pedals will translate well to clipless, and anything you learn on flat pedals is anything you learn, it's just going to help you have more fun on your bike in general.
Yes. +1 for learning. Well, you can get more information and connect with Carol on her website, flowneticmtb.com, and we'll have that link in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.